Francis. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you.
Louise, you're a Senior Research Manager for the International Data Corporation. Is that correct?
Yes, commonly known as IDC.
Yes, and you say your middle name is Data, so
yes.
that's good. All right. And you did a talk today on the transformation of a patient's experience through innovative accelerators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that was a really cool talk. I really enjoyed sitting there and listening to that.
That's great.
This is what I was hoping this conference was going to be about, seeing the future and what cool things are going to be coming out. So you kind of opened up talking about digital transformation and how the hospitals want to be sort of taking this on as a priority. Mm-hmm. And then you went through and you talked about the 6 innovative accelerators that you're going through. So I was hoping today we could go through those 6, just very briefly skim through them, and then just give the viewers a little bit of a taster of what you had, really. Cool. Okay, so the first one was the augmented and virtual reality. Now, what's the definition of that? What's augmented and what's virtual?
Okay, so augmented reality would be you can still see your surroundings around you, your environment is still visible to you, and pretty much all the information is overlaid onto that environment. So think Pokemon Go, for example. Virtual reality is where you're actually completely removed from the real world. So, for example, you might be conducting an operation on Mars, for example, or underwater. The environment is completely different, and it means you can experience what other people are experiencing. So what another surgeon is doing.
Okay, so when you're talking about virtual reality, you're talking about the headsets that people can put on and be totally engaged in a whole new world.
That's right.
And forgetting about your actual real life surroundings. Whereas the augmented, you've still got a bit of a interaction between both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay. And you talked about a contact lens.
Yes.
As an example. That was quite exciting.
Yeah.
So, what's the potential there?
I think the potential is I mean, most people know about Google Glass, for example, and that wasn't very successful because it was quite visible. But it's a similar type of principle. So it's transmitting information. So in a way, So this is part of augmented reality. So a doctor, when he's operating or he or she's operating, they'll actually see things about the patient while they're doing. So they'll be actually able to look down into the organs and know before they're actually putting something in or cutting something what they're actually cutting. So that's just a pretty simple example.
Okay, the second one you talked about was the Internet of Things.
Yes.
It sounds like a Dr. Seuss title, the Internet of Things. So my understanding of that is sort of the glue or the connection of devices. Is that right?
So it's pretty much what we call a network of networks. So networks of devices, sensors, technology. It incorporates social. So it incorporates all this data coming in from all these devices with basically no human interaction. So they don't need human interaction to operate. I mean, that's a pretty simplified explanation, but that's pretty much what it is.
Okay, I see. And so you're hoping that the prediction would be that the patients will be interacting a lot more with this in the future.
Yeah. So patients will have, after they've had an operation, they might have a medical sensor attached to their body, so they can go home earlier, for example. The doctor can still monitor how the wound is healing without actually seeing the patient themselves. And then it would automatically send off a trigger if there was an infection that was occurring in that wound. So that's just an example.
Excellent, that's so exciting. Okay. So number 3 was cognitive and artificial intelligence. And a good example we have here at the conference here is the Watson.
Yes.
And we've been talking about that in the previous interviews with Watson here, so we've covered that a little bit. But that's, you kind of related back to some movie clips, didn't you, in your talk? And
yeah. So, I mean, it's still pretty new, and I think somebody said that it's, pretty much a sledgehammer looking for a nut to crack. I think I heard that phrase a few days ago. But given the amount of data and how important it will be to healthcare, it's basically the predictive ability and basically understanding, based on all this information that's coming in, what is going to happen to a patient, how to best treat that patient, and that's why it's so important.
And the possibilities there are endless, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Now, a more controversial one, number 4, was robotics.
Yes.
Has been kind of backlashed a little bit by doctors and
I think it's like any kind of technology. It's like when we saw cloud computing in IT, CIOs and IT people, they thought they were going to lose their jobs because of cloud computing. But what we saw is their job actually changed and evolved. They could move on to more interesting types of things. So for example, with doctors, they could really focus on other areas that are important rather than things such as sutures and doing things that are not really adding value to the patient experience.
And you mentioned some challenges about the robotics,
yes.
One being money, but the other one being the accountability.
Yes.
Yeah. So if something went wrong,
yeah.
who's going to be accountable for that? Would that be the surgeon or the person who designed the software or
yeah.
the person who made the robotics?
Yeah. And that's equally relevant with other technologies. You know, we're seeing some cases in the United States where people are suing hospitals because a robotic surgery went wrong. But the thing is that when you look a bit deeper at the information, it's because they didn't follow the appropriate care when they got home, so that the wound got infected. So, but accountability is a big thing, and I think that's something that legally healthcare professionals will need to sort out to get it right.
Yeah, good point. Okay, and then number 5 was 3D printing?
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
So 3D printing, that you talked about the ear and bones?
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of medical context anyway. Yeah. It's sort of more of a focus on non-medical at the moment with 3D printing though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more on the hard stuff rather than the tissue bio 3D printing. You know, they're still pretty much in the nascent stages. You know, there's still a lot of trials going on, a lot of interesting trials, but it's getting better and better each day. And it's really the simple applications at the moment, such as prosthetics, things such as body cast, for example. When a child has a body cast on for a long period of time and they're growing, you know, they want to be able to adjust it and adjust it to make it more comfortable for the patient. Yeah,
it's a good application.
Yeah.
And the last one, which is the one that I really struck a string in my heart, was next generation security.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something quite interesting. Was it 1 in 3 patients by next year?
This year.
This year.
Yeah.
Okay. That their healthcare records will be compromised by cyber attacks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you enlighten us a bit more on that one?
So, you know, people say, oh my God, that sounds like that sounds totally unrealistic. But how we develop a prediction like that is we look at what's happened previously. For example, in the United States, you know, you just need to Google cyber attack hospitals and it will come up with all these cases where thousands and hundreds of thousands of records have been compromised. So we look at the trends and seeing what has actually happened in the past year, and then look at the growth rates that have been occurring and see how fast it's growing, and then extrapolate it. And that's the number that we actually came up with. So it's pretty scary, but healthcare as a rule have not been so good at investing in cybersecurity, and that's why they thought that it wasn't really so much relevant to them. They weren't really a target. But we're seeing more and more healthcare is actually a very valuable target for cyber criminals with all the information that they have about our patients. So that's why it's really important this year.
And there's also attached to that is devices like insulin pumps and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, in Hollywood you see all the things about, I think there was an episode in Homeland where they hacked into the vice president's pacemaker and caused a heart attack from halfway across the world. That's not really very realistic, you know, because it takes proximity, and you know that's why it's not really very real at the moment. But things like hacking into devices like insulin pumps and heart monitors, they're actually using them to actually get into hospital systems. So that's an area of weakness that healthcare organisations need to be aware of.
Right. So it's sort of more using that as a pathway to get access to a larger database.
Yeah, and when you think about all the sensor technology and medical devices, they all have software. Are they getting upgrades? You know, do they have the security patches? Is the software becoming obsolete? You know, these are things that need to be thought of.
Well, thanks, Louise. We've covered the 6 innovative ideas, and I guess it's important to point out that these are the success of these isn't guaranteed, as you said. It has to be something that's designed to solve a healthcare problem and a complex problem, and something that us as humans would want to use because it's easier for us to use. I did have one concern which I wanted to ask. With all this technology that we are starting to incorporate into work, How are we going to save the art of medicine? So you mentioned in your talk about losing the skill of flying. How do you think that doctors can incorporate technology but keep their skills going?
I think it's as I said, training is essential. These new technologies, they require a lot of training. They're never going to replace doctors. The human touch is always important. They've always shown that human touch in medicine, actually patients heal faster, that their vital signs remain more stable. So it's not taking away from medicine and doctors and professionals at all. It's more enhancing it. It means that they can do things that they've never been able to do before. And I think that's what needs to be thought of when you think of these technologies. Not that it's a replacement, it's basically an enhancement.
Cool. Well, lovely talking to you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
I will, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.